This house was built by William Byers, who started the Rocky Mountain News, the first newspaper here in Denver. Newspapers were definitely important in getting women the right to vote. This front room shows 1883, so the Victorian era, about 10 years before women in Colorado got the right to vote. The Evans, the second family, lived here for 92 years. And the daughters who grew up in this house spent most of their lives here and made sure that the house was preserved to become a museum. So almost everything in the home actually belonged to them as well. So those are the people that donated the house. Margaret Evans was born here in 1889, and Margaret Evans was involved in the women's clubs. So in the 1880s, those were becoming more and more popular throughout the country, and they started sort of, I've heard them described as like college for middle-aged women. They would teach each other about arts and literature, history, but then they took up social causes. And that's part of what laid the groundwork for the suffrage movement and the temperance movement, because these organizations were working together and they were networked from one city to the next and able to work together for these bigger causes. Women in Colorado got the right to vote in 1893, which was more than a quarter century before the 19th Amendment, which gave most women nationwide the right to vote. The interesting thing about Colorado, it's the first state where we got the vote by popular referendum, which means rather than just lawmakers putting it into place like Wyoming, where it was part of the Constitution, it's the first state where it was put to the voters. And that was the first time that the all-male voters made that decision. And so that was really significant. It was a grassroots effort. And so that's sort of the distinction that Colorado has. And so then it became like a model for the rest of the country. People were asking about how the success was and what the techniques people used to do comparisons. So after women got the right to vote in 1893, the very next year women were elected to the state legislature. That was the first time women were elected to those positions. As we were approaching the 19th Amendment passing, one of the big game changers was that women started protesting at the White House. And that was one of the first times that people were taking these techniques for protesting. With Alice Paul and the Women's Party, you were seeing a whole new type of activism happening. Women were arrested, and there was hunger strikes and things like that. And a lot of the protests were directed towards Woodrow Wilson. Women even used his own words on their posters. They were fighting for democracy around the world in World War I, yet women in America could not vote. The ballot box is from 1884, so it's one that was used for the election in 1893. And this is a ballot from 1893 when the voters were able to approve or not approve women's suffrage in Colorado. I think it's a really important anniversary to take a look at and recognize all the complexities of it, all the issues that went into the fight, and that it wasn't one that was easily won, and it wasn't over in 1920. This just removed one barrier to the vote, and that there were others that continued on beyond this point. So not all women had the right to vote in 1920, and it's important to recognize that the vote is precious and that there are still ongoing barriers and things like that to examine, and that the vote is worth exercising and fighting for today.